Marcus Webb had been the director of security at Memorial Regional Hospital in Fort Worth, Texas, for 7 years, when he made a decision that would destroy his career, devastate a family, and cost the hospital system $48 million. He was 51 years old, experienced enough to recognize a medical emergency, old enough to understand the consequences of his actions, but apparently convinced that his authority to control who entered restricted areas was more important than a patient's survival. One Friday evening in a busy cardiac care unit, he received a complaint from a charge nurse about a woman who was demanding access to a patient and allegedly interfering with medical staff. The woman was Dr. Maya Richardson, a board-certified interventional cardiologist from Johns Hopkins Hospital, sitting beside her father, who was experiencing acute myocardial infarction. What Webb did next, physically removing her from the unit, ignoring her credentials and medical expertise, and refusing to allow her to communicate critical information to the attending physicians, would become proof of how institutional bias and unchecked authority can be fatal. Her father died alone. She wasn't there to hold his hand. And Marcus Webb's decision to prioritize hospital policy over human decency would end in the largest wrongful death settlement in Texas hospital system history. A black woman in her late 30s, Dr. Maya Richardson, was standing beside her father's hospital bed in the cardiac intensive care unit, her medical credentials visible in her purse, her Johns Hopkins ID badge around her neck beneath her coat. No crime, no violation, no threat. Just a daughter who happened to be one of the nation's leading cardiac surgeons, watching her father's heart fail and knowing exactly what needed to happen to save his life. But Marcus Webb saw her through a filter so distorted by assumptions about who belongs in hospital-restricted areas that he couldn't process a black woman as a legitimate medical professional, even when she was wearing her hospital ID and explaining in precise clinical terminology what was happening to her father's heart. Before we continue, where are you watching from? If this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be shared, and your support helps us bring more truth to light. Memorial Regional Hospital sits on West Magnolia Avenue in Fort Worth's medical district. It's a Level 1 trauma center, the kind of facility where the most critical cases arrive, where code blues echo through hallways at all hours, where families gather in waiting rooms praying for miracles. 800 beds spread across 3 towers. State-of-the-art cardiac care unit on the 4th floor of the main building. 24 private rooms arranged in a semicircle around the central nursing station. Each room equipped with the latest monitoring equipment, the walls painted in calming blues and grays, the lighting deliberately soft to avoid agitating patients in crisis. It was 6:38 p.m. on a Friday in November. The evening shift had just taken over. The cardiac unit was at 80% capacity, 16 patients, most of them recovering from procedures, 2 in active crisis. The hallways were quiet but tense, that particular atmosphere that exists in spaces where life and death decisions happen constantly. The cafeteria downstairs was closing. Visiting hours would end at 8. Family members clustered in patient rooms, some reading, some staring at monitors they didn't understand, some holding hands with loved ones who couldn't respond. The kind of Friday evening where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen, because the weekend cardiac surgeon was already on call, and the attending physicians were hoping for a quiet night. Dr. Maya Richardson had been an interventional cardiologist at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore for 11 years. 11 years of performing complex cardiac catheterizations, installing stents, managing acute coronary syndromes, teaching residents, publishing research. She'd completed over 2,000 procedures. She'd saved hundreds of lives. Her colleagues called her meticulous. Her patients called her a miracle worker. She'd graduated from Howard University College of Medicine, then completed her residency at Massachusetts General Hospital, where she'd been named chief resident in her final year. She'd done her fellowship in interventional cardiology at Johns Hopkins, where they'd offered her a permanent position before she'd even finished. She'd published 17 peer-reviewed articles on cardiac intervention techniques. She'd received the American Heart Association's Early Career Award. She'd lectured at medical conferences across the country. At 39 years old, she was exactly where she'd worked to be. At the peak of a career she'd sacrificed everything to build. She'd grown up in Fort Worth, the daughter of James Richardson, a postal worker who'd worked night shifts for 30 years to pay for her education. Her mother had died when Maya was 16. After that, it had been just her and her father. He'd attended every graduation, every award ceremony, every milestone. When she'd matched at Mass General, he'd driven to Boston to help her move into her apartment. When she'd been offered the position at Johns Hopkins, he'd been the first person she'd called. At 72 years old, James Richardson lived alone in the same modest house in Fort Worth where Maya had grown up. He'd retired 3 years earlier. He had hypertension, managed with medication. He had high cholesterol, controlled with statins. He'd been healthy otherwise, active, independent, the kind of man who still mowed his own lawn and refused help with anything. That Friday, James Richardson had felt chest pain starting around noon, crushing pain radiating down his left arm. He'd called 911 at 2:15 p.m. The paramedics had arrived within 7 minutes. They'd administered aspirin and started an IV. They'd transported him to Memorial Regional, the closest Level 1 trauma center, arriving at 2:47 p.m. The emergency department had diagnosed acute ST elevation myocardial infarction, a massive heart attack. They'd administered thrombolytics and transferred him to the cardiac catheterization lab by 3:30 p.m. The interventional cardiologist on duty had installed 2 stents in his left anterior descending artery. The procedure had been successful. James had been moved to the cardiac intensive care unit at 5:15 p.m., stable but critical, being monitored closely for complications. Maya had been in Baltimore when her father's neighbor called her at 3:00 p.m. She'd immediately booked the next flight to Dallas-Fort Worth. She'd landed at 5:50 p.m. and driven directly to Memorial Regional, arriving at the hospital at 6:30 p.m. She'd gone straight to the cardiac unit, identified herself at the nursing station, and been directed to room 418. Her father had been conscious when she'd arrived, weak, frightened, but conscious. The monitors showed his heart rate at 95, blood pressure at 110/70, oxygen saturation at 94%. He'd smiled when he'd seen her. "Baby girl," he'd said, "you didn't have to fly all the way here." "Of course I did," she'd said, taking his hand. She'd introduced herself to the nurse, Stephanie Cole, a 10-year veteran of the cardiac unit. She'd explained that she was Dr. Richardson's daughter and also a cardiologist. She'd asked about his care plan, his medications, his post-procedure status. Nurse Cole had been polite but brief. "The attending will be making rounds at 7, she'd said. "You can speak with him then." Maya had nodded and sat beside her father's bed. She'd reviewed the monitor readings. Everything had looked stable. She'd held his hand. They'd talked quietly. He'd told her about the chest pain, about the ambulance ride, about how scared he'd been. She'd reassured him. "You're in good hands," she'd said. "The stents are in. You're going to be fine." At 6:35 p.m., the monitors had changed. James Richardson's heart rate had jumped to 125. His blood pressure had dropped to 88/60. His oxygen saturation had fallen to 89%. Maya had stood immediately, looking at the screen, recognizing what was happening. Ventricular tachycardia. His heart rhythm was deteriorating. She'd pressed the call button. No response. She'd pressed it again. Nothing. She'd stepped into the hallway and called out, "I need a nurse in 418. His rhythm is changing." Nurse Cole had appeared from the nursing station, annoyed. "We're monitoring him. Please return to the room. His heart rate is 125 and climbing. His blood pressure is dropping. He's going into VTAC. Someone needs to assess him immediately." "Are you a physician?" "I'm a cardiologist. I'm his daughter. I'm telling you his rhythm is deteriorating and he needs intervention now." This is where professional expertise becomes invisible. Maya Richardson wasn't speaking as a worried daughter. She was speaking as a board-certified interventional cardiologist with 11 years of experience, using precise clinical terminology, identifying a life-threatening arrhythmia in real time. But Nurse Cole heard only a family member telling her how to do her job. "Ma'am, I understand you're concerned, but we need you to let us do our work. Please return to the room and remain with your father." Maya had returned to the room. The monitors were worse. Heart rate 132, blood pressure 82/58. oxygen saturation 86%. Her father was conscious but confused, his eyes unfocused, his breathing rapid and shallow. She'd known what was happening. Cardiogenic shock. His heart wasn't pumping effectively. His blood pressure was dropping because his cardiac output was failing. Without immediate intervention, he would arrest. She'd opened her purse and pulled out her Johns Hopkins Hospital ID badge, clipping it to her coat. She'd stepped back into the hallway. His pressure is crashing. He needs a fluid bolus, and we need to call cardiology now. He's going into shock. Nurse Cole had walked briskly toward room 418, her expression tight with irritation. She'd glanced at the monitors. For a moment, her face had changed. She'd seen what Maya was seeing. But instead of calling the rapid response team, instead of paging cardiology, Nurse Cole had picked up the phone at the nursing station and called someone else. Security to cardiac ICU, room 418. Family member causing a disruption. Maya had stared at her. What are you doing? He needs medical intervention. Ma'am, you need to step back. You're interfering with patient care. I'm not interfering. I'm telling you he's in cardiogenic shock. Look at his vitals. His systolic is under 85. His heart rate is 135. He needs emergency intervention. Please return to the room or you'll be asked to leave the unit. At that exact moment, James Richardson's monitors had alarmed. A loud, continuous beep. Maya had rushed back into the room. Her father's eyes had rolled back. His body had gone rigid. The monitor showed ventricular fibrillation. His heart had stopped pumping blood effectively. He was dying. Maya had reached for the code blue button on the wall. Before she could press it, Nurse Cole had entered the room and blocked her. Step away from the patient. He's arresting. We need to code him. Step away, or I'm calling security again. I am a cardiologist. My father is coding. Move. Security Director Marcus Webb had appeared in the doorway at precisely 6:38 p.m. He was a large man, 6'3", 240 pounds, former military, the kind of physical presence designed to intimidate. He'd been responding to what Nurse Cole had described as an aggressive family member disrupting patient care. He'd seen a black woman in civilian clothes standing near a patient's bed, arguing with a nurse. He hadn't seen her Johns Hopkins ID badge. He hadn't asked who she was. He'd seen exactly what Nurse Cole wanted him to see, a problem that needed to be removed. Marcus Webb's employment record at Memorial Regional was extensive. 7 years as Director of Security. Before that, 9 years in various security positions at other hospitals. Before that, 12 years as a military police officer in the Army. On paper, he was qualified. In practice, he had a documented pattern that his supervisors had chosen to ignore. 14 complaints in 7 years. All 14 involving allegations that Webb had treated black visitors, black patients, or black staff with disproportionate aggression. A father visiting his daughter in the maternity ward was stopped and questioned about why he was in the building. A black physician was asked to show credentials 3 times in 1 week. A grandmother bringing flowers to her grandson in pediatrics was escorted out for allegedly raising her voice when she'd been speaking at normal volume. Each complaint had been documented. Each complaint had been dismissed with the same response. Director Webb was following hospital security protocols. 4 years earlier, Webb had forcibly removed a black woman from the emergency department waiting room for allegedly being combative. The woman had been waiting for news about her husband, who'd been brought in after a car accident. She'd asked multiple times for updates. Webb had interpreted her repeated questions as aggression and had physically escorted her out of the building. Her husband had died while she was being removed. She'd filed a complaint. The hospital had settled quietly for an undisclosed amount. Webb had received counseling and remained in his position. 2 years earlier, Webb had confronted a black male nurse in the employee parking garage, demanding to see his hospital ID even though the nurse was in scrubs with his badge visible. The nurse had filed a complaint. Webb had claimed he hadn't seen the badge and was following security protocols. The complaint had been filed away. The pattern was documented. The pattern was clear. But Memorial Regional Hospital's administration had treated each incident in isolation, never connecting them, never acknowledging that Marcus Webb consistently saw black people as threats regardless of context. Now, Standing in the doorway of room 418, Marcus Webb saw what he expected to see, another situation requiring his authority. "Ma'am, you need to leave this area immediately." The monitor behind Maya was screaming. Her father's heart had stopped beating effectively. Every second mattered. "My father's having a heart attack. I'm a cardiologist. I need to stay with him." Webb had stepped into the room, his hand moving to his hip where his radio was clipped. "This area is restricted. You need to step back." Maya had held up her Johns Hopkins ID badge, the hospital logo clearly visible, her credentials printed beneath her photo. Maya, Richardson, MD, FACC, interventional cardiology. "I'm Dr. Maya Richardson. I'm his daughter, and I'm a cardiac surgeon. He needs immediate intervention." Webb had glanced at the badge but hadn't processed what it meant. In his mind, the decision was already made. This woman was causing a disruption. She needed to be removed. Her credentials were irrelevant. "I don't care if you're a surgeon. You're causing a disruption, and you need to leave now." The monitor alarm continued. James Richardson was dying. Maya's medical training was screaming at her to act. Her hands knew exactly what to do. Start compressions. Call the code. Get the crash cart. Administer epinephrine. Shock the heart. Every second without intervention decreased survival probability by 10%. His vitals are crashing. "Look at the monitor. He needs nitroglycerin, and I need to speak with his care team." Behind Webb, Nurse Cole had finally pressed the code blue button. The announcement echoed through the unit. "Code blue. Cardiac ICU room 418. Code blue. Cardiac ICU room 418. But instead of stepping aside to let the code team work, Webb had moved forward, positioning himself between Maya and her father's bed. "Security has been called. If you don't leave voluntarily, you'll be removed." Maya had looked at him, at the monitors, at her father's still form. She'd made a decision. She'd stepped past Webb, reaching for her father's wrist to check for a pulse. Webb had grabbed her arm. "You're removing a cardiologist from her dying father's bedside?" "That's exactly what I'm doing." He'd pulled her backward, away from the bed. Maya had tried to resist, her medical training warring with the physical reality of Webb's size and strength. 2 additional security officers had appeared in the doorway. "She's leaving," Webb had told them. "Now." The code team had rushed into the room at that exact moment. 3 nurses and a resident physician, pushing the crash cart, moving with practiced urgency. They'd surrounded James Richardson's bed, starting compressions, attaching defibrillator pads, drawing up medications. Maya had watched from the doorway as Webb and the other security officers had escorted her backward into the hallway. She'd seen the code team working. She'd seen the monitor still showing ventricular fibrillation. She'd known exactly what medications her father needed, what rhythm he was in, what interventions would work. "Let me go," she'd said. "I'm a cardiologist. I can help them." "You're leaving this unit," Webb had said. They'd escorted her to the elevator. 3 security officers surrounding a board-certified cardiologist, removing her from the cardiac unit while her father died 30 feet away. The elevator doors had closed. They'd taken her to the first floor. They'd walked her to the main entrance. "You can wait in the main lobby," Webb had told her. "Someone will update you when there's information. I'm his daughter. I'm a physician. You just removed me from a code. Hospital policy is clear about family members interfering with medical care." "I wasn't interfering. I was trying to save his life." Webb had turned and walked back inside. Maya had stood in the entrance, her hands shaking, her mind racing through everything that had just happened. She'd pulled out her phone and called the hospital's main line. She'd asked to be transferred to the cardiac unit. The call had rung 4 times before someone had answered. "Cardiac ICU. This is Dr. Maya Richardson. I need to speak with whoever is running the code in room 418. "I'm sorry, we can't provide information about codes in progress. That's my father. I'm a cardiologist. I was just forcibly removed from the unit by security. I need to speak with the attending physician immediately. I'll have to call you back." The line had gone dead. Maya had stood in the lobby, surrounded by other visitors, watching the elevators, waiting for someone to come find her, to tell her what was happening, to let her back up to the unit. 22 minutes later, a hospital chaplain had approached her. His face had told her everything before he'd said a word. The code had lasted 18 minutes. They'd shocked her father's heart 4 times. They'd administered epinephrine, amiodarone, lidocaine. They'd done everything the ACLS protocol required, but the response time had been too slow. By the time the code team had arrived, James Richardson had been in ventricular fibrillation for nearly 3 minutes. His heart had been deprived of effective blood flow. His brain had been deprived of oxygen. They'd gotten his heart beating again briefly. It had stopped again. They'd shocked him again. It had restarted. It had stopped. At 7:01 p.m., the attending physician had called the code. James Richardson was pronounced dead. Maya had collapsed in the lobby. The chaplain had caught her. She'd sobbed into his shoulder, her body shaking, her mind replaying every moment. The monitors changing, her calling for help. Nurse Cole ignoring her assessment. Marcus Webb removing her from the room, the elevator doors closing, her father dying alone. Dr. Philip Martinez, chief of cardiology at Memorial Regional, arrived at the hospital at 7:15 p.m. He'd been at home when he'd received the call about the code. He'd come immediately. Someone had explained what had happened. The family member removed by security had been Dr. Maya Richardson from Johns Hopkins, one of the most respected interventional cardiologists in the country. The patient who died had been her father. Martinez had found Maya in a small consultation room off the main lobby. She'd been sitting alone, her face blank, her eyes red. "Dr. Richardson," he'd said, "I'm Dr. Philip Martinez, chief of cardiology. I am profoundly sorry for your loss." She'd looked at him. "I tried to tell them he was going into shock. I told them his pressure was crashing. I told them he needed intervention. I understand you're a cardiologist." "Johns Hopkins, 11 years. I do this every day. I knew exactly what was happening to him." Martinez had sat down across from her. "Walk me through what you observed." She'd explained everything. The vital sign changes, the tachycardia, the dropping blood pressure, the declining oxygen saturation, the signs of cardiogenic shock that she'd recognized immediately because she'd treated hundreds of identical cases. Her attempts to get Nurse Cole to act. The call to security instead of cardiology. Marcus Webb removing her from the unit while her father arrested. "If I'd been there," she'd said, her voice breaking, "if they'd let me stay, I could have told the code team his exact rhythm. I could have confirmed the right medications. I could have held his hand. He died alone because Marcus Webb decided my credentials didn't matter." Should hospitals face federal oversight after security removes credentialed physicians from life-threatening emergencies? Drop your answer below. Martinez had reviewed the code documentation. He'd reviewed the nursing notes. He'd reviewed the timeline. James Richardson's monitors had shown clear signs of deterioration starting at 6:35 p.m. Nurse Cole had documented the vital sign changes, but hadn't called the rapid response team. She'd called security instead. The code blue hadn't been activated until 6:38 p.m., 3 minutes after the crisis had begun. Marcus Webb had removed Dr. Richardson from the unit at 6:39 p.m., while the code was actively in progress. Martinez had written a formal incident report that night. His assessment was clear. Dr. Maya Richardson, a board-certified interventional cardiologist, correctly identified cardiogenic shock in her father and requested appropriate medical intervention. Hospital staff failed to recognize her professional credentials and expertise. Security removed her from the unit during an active code blue. The patient's death may have been preventable with earlier intervention. The hospital's risk management team had reviewed the case by Monday morning. They'd watched the security footage. It showed everything. Maya identifying herself as a cardiologist. Maya showing her Johns Hopkins ID badge to Webb. Webb dismissing her credentials. Webb physically removing her from the unit. The code team arriving seconds later. The hospital's attorneys had reached the same conclusion Martinez had. Indefensible. A nationally recognized cardiologist had correctly identified a cardiac emergency involving her own father. Hospital staff had ignored her assessment, called security instead of the rapid response team, and physically removed her while her father died. The facts were undeniable. The negligence was obvious. The discrimination was implied, but impossible to ignore. Memorial Regional Hospital had issued a statement 4 days later. "We are conducting a thorough investigation into the circumstances surrounding the death of James Richardson. We extend our deepest condolences to his daughter, Dr. Maya Richardson, and we are reviewing our security protocols and staff response procedures." Marcus Webb had been placed on administrative leave immediately. 2 weeks later, he'd been terminated. His termination letter was final and unequivocal. Director Webb removed a credentialed physician from a medical emergency despite being informed of her professional qualifications. His actions directly interfered with patient care during a life-threatening crisis. Director Webb's documented pattern of disproportionate responses involving Black visitors and staff demonstrates a persistent failure to perform his duties without bias. His employment is terminated effective immediately. Nurse Stephanie Cole had been suspended without pay for 30 days. Her performance review had been devastating. Failed to recognize and respond to clear signs of cardiogenic shock despite being alerted by a board-certified cardiologist. Called security instead of activating rapid response protocols. Contributed to delayed intervention that may have prevented patient death. She'd resigned before the suspension ended. Dr. Maya Richardson had hired civil rights attorneys within a week. The lawsuit had named Marcus Webb, Nurse Stephanie Cole, Dr. Philip Martinez as Chief of Cardiology with supervisory responsibility, Memorial Regional Hospital, and the hospital system's parent corporation, Southwestern Healthcare Alliance. The claims were extensive: wrongful death through negligent failure to provide timely medical intervention, racial discrimination in the provision of medical services, intentional infliction of emotional distress, violation of civil rights under Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, negligent hiring, training, and supervision of security personnel with documented patterns of discriminatory behavior, corporate negligence in failing to address repeated complaints about security directors' bias. The case had built itself through documentation. Webb's 14 complaints over 7 years. The prior settlement involving a woman removed from the emergency department while her husband died. The nursing notes showing Nurse Cole had documented vital sign changes but hadn't acted. The security footage showing Maya's credentials being dismissed. The code documentation showing an 18-minute attempt to save a patient who'd been in crisis for over 20 minutes. Medical experts had reviewed the case. Their conclusions were unanimous. James Richardson had experienced cardiogenic shock following his cardiac catheterization, a known but manageable complication. With immediate intervention, fluid bolus, vasopressors, possible intra-aortic balloon pump, his survival probability would have been 60 to 70%. The 3-minute delay in activating the code blue, combined with the removal of a cardiologist who could have provided expert guidance, had reduced his survival probability to less than 20%. Southwestern Healthcare Alliance's insurance carriers had reviewed the evidence and authorized settlement negotiations immediately. They'd understood what a jury would see: a Black cardiologist, credentialed and competent, correctly identifying a medical emergency; a white security director with a documented history of discriminatory behavior, removing her from her dying father's bedside; a hospital system that had ignored complaints about that security director for 7 years; and a patient who died alone while his physician daughter had been escorted to the lobby. The settlement had been reached 14 months after James Richardson's death. Southwestern Healthcare Alliance had paid $48 million to Dr. Maya Richardson. At the time, it was the largest wrongful death settlement in Texas hospital system history. The money had been divided into several components: $20 million in compensatory damages for wrongful death, $15 million in punitive damages for racial discrimination and civil rights violations, $10 million for emotional distress and loss of consortium, $3 million for Dr. Richardson's own medical treatment for trauma and PTSD resulting from witnessing her father's death and being forcibly removed during the crisis. The settlement agreement had included non-monetary provisions. Southwestern Healthcare Alliance had agreed to implement comprehensive reforms across all 23 hospitals in their system. Mandatory bias training for all security personnel, with annual recertification. Automatic federal notification when security removes any credentialed medical professional from patient care areas. Zero tolerance policy, requiring immediate termination of security personnel after 3 complaints involving allegations of racial bias. Independent Civilian Oversight Board to review all security incidents involving patients or visitors of color. Quarterly pattern analysis of all security responses. Flagging racial disparities for investigation. Memorial Regional had installed a memorial plaque in the cardiac ICU. It read, James Richardson, 1951-2023, in memory of a devoted father and postal worker who dedicated his life to his daughter's dreams. May his legacy inspire us to see every person's humanity and hear every voice's truth. Maya Richardson had testified at a Texas State Senate hearing on hospital security practices. Her testimony was brief, powerful, and devastating. I'm Dr. Maya Richardson. I'm an interventional cardiologist with 11 years of experience at Johns Hopkins Hospital. I've performed over 2,000 cardiac procedures. I've saved hundreds of lives. I've published 17 peer-reviewed articles. I've received national awards for my work. She paused, her hands gripping the podium. On November 17, 2023, I watched my father's heart fail. I recognized cardiogenic shock immediately because I treat it regularly. I alerted the nursing staff. I identified myself as a cardiologist. I showed my hospital credentials. And I was physically removed from the cardiac unit by security while my father died alone. Another pause. I wasn't removed because I was disruptive. I was removed because I'm black. Because Marcus Webb looked at me and saw a problem, not a physician. Because Nurse Cole heard my medical assessment and decided I was an interfering family member, not a colleague. Because Memorial Regional's administration had received 14 complaints about Marcus Webb's treatment of black visitors and staff, and they'd done nothing. She looked directly at the senators. My father died alone. I wasn't there to hold his hand. I wasn't there to tell him I loved him. I wasn't there to comfort him in his final moments. $48 million doesn't change that. It doesn't bring him back. It doesn't erase the trauma of being escorted away while he was dying 30 feet behind me. She paused again, composing herself. 14 complaints in 7 years. That's not bad luck. That's not miscommunication. That's a pattern. And Memorial Regional ignored that pattern until it killed someone. If this can happen to me, a board-certified cardiologist from one of the best hospitals in the country, what happens to ordinary families? What happens to people who don't have medical credentials? What happens to people who don't have resources to fight back? The chamber was silent. Do you think security directors with 3 or more racial bias complaints should face automatic federal review before they're allowed to continue working? Drop your answer. This wasn't just about one security director or one nurse or one hospital. This was about a system that had protected Marcus Webb through 14 complaints over 7 years. A system that had treated each incident in isolation, never connecting the dots, never acknowledging the pattern. A system that had given Webb training and counseling and kept him in a position of authority where he could harm people. Webb's history told the story his supervisors had ignored. The father questioned in the maternity ward. The physician asked for credentials 3 times. The grandmother escorted out for alleged aggression. The woman removed from the emergency department while her husband died. Every incident involving black people. Every complaint dismissed as a misunderstanding. Every pattern denied until it was fatal. Marcus Webb's career is over. That's consequence. The hospital paid $48 million. That's accountability. Nurse Cole resigned. That's consequences. But money and terminations don't undo the trauma of watching your father die while being physically prevented from reaching him. They don't restore the final moments stolen from a daughter and father. They don't erase the message that even a Johns Hopkins badge wasn't enough to protect Dr. Richardson's father from bias. The real question is, what changes now? Do hospitals finally remove security directors after 3 complaints instead of 14? Do medical institutions finally train staff to recognize credentials regardless of the person's race? Do we finally acknowledge that interfering with patient care often means a black person advocating for their own family? Because if we don't fix the systems that kept Marcus Webb employed for 7 years despite 14 complaints, if we don't address the culture that taught Nurse Cole to call security instead of cardiology, then we're just waiting for the next director, the next nurse, the next family, the next death that could have been prevented. Comment if you believe this should be law. Hospital security personnel face automatic federal oversight after 3 complaints involving allegations of racial bias, with mandatory termination after 5 complaints. And if you think these stories need to be told, if you believe accountability starts with awareness and change starts with pressure, then hit that subscribe button. We're not stopping. We're going to keep exposing these patterns. We're going to keep demanding better. We're going to keep fighting for the Dr. Richardsons, the James Richardsons, the families who deserve to be together in their most vulnerable moments without being criminalized. This isn't just about one security director, one nurse, or one cardiologist. It's about all of us and the world we're willing to accept. Because every family deserves the chance to say goodbye. Every credential deserves recognition, and every life deserves protection from the kind of bias that sees threats where there are only daughters trying to save their fathers.